Hello, my name is Jason Banks, and this is my MIT812 into course reflection. The first thing I started off with was the objectives, and I thought really these could be broken down into two different categories. The first one being what my personal objectives were, and I wanted my students to be able to apply these big ideas that we're getting to their own lives and their community. I also wanted my students to be able to transfer information in a clear manner. I wanted them to select and use digital tools to plan and manage a design process that considers design constraints and calculated risks, as you can see. That's the ISTE standard in the student section 4B. And then I also want my students to be able to negotiate these various tools and in the production of a final product. As far as the students went, my student objectives were that I wanted them to document how the changes that they saw allow the theme a text to emerge, right? So I wanted them to be able to trace a character, follow that character from the beginning, see how that character changed, and then see how that can help us to see what the lesson is that we're supposed to learn. I also wanted them to be able to explain that analysis. Like I wanted them to be able to explain as they were tracking that character, what did they notice? How did those things go together and make a theme? And then finally, they needed to, as we saw earlier, one of my objectives is that they will then be able to explain how those themes continue to be relevant today. So the story that we're reading takes place in the 1930s. I wanted them to recognize that just because something takes place in the past doesn't mean that it can't be an important lesson that we can learn today. As far as reflecting on this, what I found really interesting was the process asking me to basically work through what I would be asking my students to do was a pretty useful tool because it helped me to see that there are going to be issues, and in order for this to be an effective lesson, and in order for this to be effective for them, because I teach middle school students, they're not quite ready to venture off into these kinds of activities on their own. I don't think I could ever be like as vague's not the right word, as our own class instructions have been, where we were supposed to go find a tool. I could never ask them to go find a tool. I'm going to have to place those tools before them. I'm also going to have to provide them some basic instruction on those tools because they'll not be able to deal with the stress of having to try to figure that tool out as well as figure out what content needs to go in. So I really need to either, just like I think about with reading and writing in my class, I can either give them a really difficult reading task and the writing about that reading can be very simple, or a very difficult reading task. A writing task, and then the reading needs to be more simple so that they're not having to struggle with both those things. And I think with my middle school students, that's also something I'm going to have to take into account here because I did have some struggles getting things to load here, figuring out where things went. And while I'm patient and able to make those things happen, I think for a middle school student, I'm definitely going to want to have things laid out pretty cut and dried for them. And then finally, well, not finally, but the two ISTE standards that I found myself continually going back to were E5A, which is we're going to use technology to create, adapt, and personalize learning experiences that foster independent learning and accommodate learning differences and needs. Because I think this project has that ability to help them learn independently and begin to foster that independent learning, right? We're not, like I said earlier, we're not quite there with middle school students to just cast them off into their own and see what they can produce. Need to give them quite a bit of guidance. And then the other one that I kept coming back to was exploring and applying instructional design principles to create innovative, digital learning environments that engage and support learning. So when I was thinking about this project, I think using the technology will help them to be a bit more engaged in it because it won't be just the traditional language arts essay that they have to produce. They'll be still doing the same concepts that would be applied towards writing an essay. They'll just be applying those concepts in a new and different way, which I think will be pretty good for them. And then so my big takeaway was with this idea of TPAC and that this sort of all the details that need to go into that. you need to be, you need to really know your content. And then what I learned was that idea that tool selection, going and being a master of the technology part is also good. And then understanding how to teach students how to use these things is also important. And all that circled back around into my mind about this good idea about planning with the end in mind, and how we really need to make sure that we're doing that. So that's my presentation, and thanks for listening.